You have two clients, client number 1 and client number 2, and they cannot talk to each other. Why? It's complicated, but NAT and the way the web works and firewalls and lots of things. But suffice it to say, clients don't receive messages. Only servers do. In fact, the way your router is set up is it blocks all incoming traffic unless you have sent a message to them first. Did you know that? Well, that's how your firewall works. If you send a message to some server, that server is allowed to reply. If some random server sends a message to your home computer, the firewall says, wait a minute, who the heck are you? Get out of here. Why is that a good idea? Yeah, you don't want random people messing up with your computer, do you? That adds a lot of security. The mere fact that no one can talk to your computer unless you talk to them first, that's called a firewall. That's kind of what makes your computer a client and makes those other computers servers. So one big difference between a server and a client is the server has tweaked their router and said, open up this port and let anyone talk to us. Why do they do that? Because if they don't, no one will talk to them. They're not a server, right? So here's the idea. Clients get to talk to the server. The server doesn't talk to anyone. It just receives phone calls. So, oops, I'm SSH'd into a remote server. Sorry. Okay. If this is the server, and this is client number 0, and this is client number 1, it's kind of like they all have cell phones, except only client 0 and client 1 will ever dial. The server will never dial. The server will only say, hello? Got that? Okay. And the server will respond, hello, only to whomever talks to the server. Okay? So how does client 0 get a message to client number 1? You leave it on the server. Got it? And how does client 1 give a message to client 0? You leave it on the server. Basically, the server is McDonald's. And this is the Happy Meal where the clients can deposit their messages. And you have to write code to make client 0 and client 1 talk to each other, but they can only do it by depositing messages on the server. Does that make sense? Okay, at a high level, that's really important to get before you try to do assignment 8. Yeah?
So I got confused with the information. So now client can send information to the server, correct?
Anybody can send stuff to the server. All you do is you call up the server says hello, you send the message.
But server cannot send to the client, right?
The server will respond to every call. If a client sends to the server will respond to that same client. If another client talks to the server will respond to that same another client. If client 0 calls the server will not call client number 1. So if you send something to the server, if you tell the server, hey, Mario is at position 1, 2, 3, 4, and this message goes up to the server, and the server replies, Mario is at position 1, 2, 3, 4, who will get the message? The same person that sent it. And that's worthless. So how can we say, hey, Mario's at position 1, 2, 3, 4, and get it down here? You send it up here, you put it in the Happy Meal box, and then you sit there until client number 1 calls up the server, and when client number 1 calls the server and says, hey, Luigi is at position 4, 3, 2, 1, the server will reply, oh, thank you. And by the way, Mario is at position 1, 2, 3, 4. And then client 0 calls up the server and says, well, now Mario's at position 1, 2, 3, 5. The server will say, thank you. And by the way, Luigi is at position 4, 3, 2, 1. And then client number 1 says, well, now Luigi's at position 4, 3, 2, 2, and sends this up to the server. And the server will say, well, thank you. And by the way, Mario is really now at position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you see how there's kind of this dance going on? But the messages are getting across from client 1 to 2 and from 2 to 1. They're just getting there indirectly by way of the server. The server has to facilitate the exchange between the clients. At a high level, is that totally clear?
Oh, gotcha.
Yep.
So this method does not happen. In general, as a server or a client, is that what's happening also like in general, like with the computer and the server, or just like on the more?
This is what's happening in general. So let's, for example, say this server is named Facebook, and this client is named your mom, and this client is named you. Okay? Well, when you post something on Facebook, how does it get onto your mom's computer? It will not get on your mom's computer unless, after you talk to Facebook, your mom talks to Facebook. And when you're at facebook.com, I can assure you, your browser is constantly pinging Facebook saying, what's new, what's new, what's new, what's new? And Facebook is sending down everything that people are posting. That's why you see people on Facebook. They're only there because facebook.com, the web page, is pinging facebook.com, the server, all the time to get new information. And I believe that this little assignment really helps people digest and understand what's going on the web. And that's important because about 90% of the jobs out there for programmers right now are web programming jobs. So understanding this whole AJAX, JavaScript, server-client architecture thing, I kind of think this is the most important assignment in the entire class. If you're planning to pass the class without completing assignment 8, you're missing something really important. This is what's happening right now in the world. So get this one done, and then you're in good shape to call yourself a programmer. Let's do common issues that we're seeing. Okay, here's the most common issue. IDs are going crazy. Yeah? Okay. Let's suppose your IDs, some of your clients are getting IDs like my ID equals 210. What's your bug?
Changing the ID every time.
Yeah, here's what I'm thinking. You know how you are contacting your server 40 times a second? Because every time a frame happens, you're going to contact your server? Or every 10 frames or something like that? You're going to go contact the server. If every time you contact the server, you increment your ID, then that's what's going on, right? If your ID is getting bigger than, say, 2, that might be what's going on. So if you're having ID problems, ask yourself the question, is the server handing out IDs willy-nilly every single time a client contacts him? Or is the server handing out an ID every time the client says, please server, may I have an ID? Okay, so the solution is don't hand out IDs unless the client asks for one. That will solve this problem. But what does that mean in terms of code? Well, if the client says, my ID is -1, the server should say, oh, you poor thing, you need a new ID. Here you go. And if the client says, my ID is 0, the server should say, your ID is 0, because you just told me your ID was 0. The server should not say, oh, your ID is 0, well, your ID is 2. Oh, your ID is 2, well, now your ID is 3. Do you see how changing the ID all the time is just kind of confusing? Okay, so don't change the ID a lot. Only change the ID when the client asks for a new ID. Basically, if the client says my ID is -1, that means I need a new ID. If the client says my ID is 0, that doesn't mean give me a new ID. That means I already know who I am. Give me something new, like where Luigi is. Make sense? Okay. Next problem with IDs is, what other problems are you having with IDs? Yeah.
Like my ID gives a 0,
Okay.
and the server gives them 1.
Okay.
Later on, it calls again, but the client gave them only Mario's position, Luigi's position, but no ID.
Ah, okay.
And it just crashes.
A lot of people are getting server crashes due to no field named ID in JSON object or something like that. That's not the exact message, but there's some message that basically says, hey, I was looking for an ID in this JSON object and there wasn't one. What do? Well, first of all, you know how your server logs every communication that happens to the console? Let me point at this just so you know what I'm talking about. What did I call it? Oh, I forgot. When you unzip the starter kit for this assignment, what folder is it in? Anybody know? It's in Java something? Java, nope. C web server? Oh, there it is. Java C star.java. Java main. Is that the same one?
No, like one word. Java won't say.
Yeah, it's more than long.
Okay. Well, see all this stuff here? The client said, the server said. This is the server logging the exchanges that have occurred between them, right? Well, look at those and see that the client is passing some JSON blob. And if that JSON blob looks like this, Mario colon 231 comma Luigi colon 412. What does that mean? Well, the message is correct. There is no field named ID in there. That's significant. That will tell you which side the problem is on, right? If the client sent this to the server, that means the problem is on the client because the client did not send an ID. So don't be trying to debug the server when the client didn't do what the server was expecting. Well, maybe the server's wrong to expect it, right? That's up to you. If you want your server to expect it, then the client should do it. If you want your client to not send an ID, then the server should stop expecting it. You know how most problems in communication and marriage and life are failed expectations? That's kind of what's happening here. You need to work out your expectations and make sure the other side is meeting them, and that's what'll happen. Now, one common reason why this is happening is if you look at your code, you have this let ob equal something, and then you say ob equals ob.id equals my ID, semicolon, ob.mario x equals mario x, etc. And then you say send ob. That's not exactly what it looks like, but that's an example, right? How on earth is this object coming out of this code? Turns out that if my ID has a value of undefined, then that gets rid of an ID field from the ob object. Does that make sense? Meaning if my ID is undefined, this is the magical non-existent value in JavaScript, then the ob object doesn't have an ob. In fact, it doesn't have a Luigi either here. I'll put an ob.luigi equals 42412, and it's just Mario is 231. Okay. So this code could produce this JSON blob if my ID is undefined. So a good way to catch it is to leave a little trap for the bug by saying if my ID equals undefined, notice the 3 equal signs, alert, hey, how did my ID get undefined? And now if I run my program and this alert pops up, that tells me I totally understand the problem. My ID is undefined, and that's the cause of the problem. If that's the cause of your problem, what are you going to do? Figure out why my ID is undefined. Maybe leave alerts all throughout your code and figure out how undefined got into my ID. One way that could happen is if on your server, you didn't send an ID to your client. And so when the client received a message from the server, it looked for an ID in there, and there wasn't one, so it was undefined. And so the client then stuck undefined as my ID. And then you stuck it in here as ID, and then you sent it back to the server, and that crashed the server. See how that's all happening? I've seen that a lot, so that might solve a lot of problems right there.